I did everything right and they indicted me.
And I don't know what the I'm doing. Antifa!
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a Friday daytime stream of the Katie Halper Show. We are thrilled to be here with you. We have a great lineup. I'm already getting emotional, as you can see. No, we have a great lineup. We have 3 different segments. We are going to be speaking to, in reverse order, Jake Romm, the attorney with the Hind Rajab Foundation, which attempts to and succeeds at holding Israeli war criminals accountable. Before we speak to Jake, we will be speaking to Rania Khalek of Breakthrough News and Medea Benjamin from Code Pink. And before that, though, we're going to be speaking to a special guest, Ron Placone, who is an anti-fascist comedian, and he's going to be talking to us about anti-fascist comedy and being anti-fascist and Italian. So before we start, though, we remind people, as always, to please like the stream, give it a thumbs up. Also, please subscribe so you don't miss any streams, because we do stream every Tuesday and Friday, more or less, but every now and then it switches up. In fact, I just realized that this week, August 6th, we're having Ro Khanna on, and that is a Wednesday. So we're going to be streaming on Wednesday. Brad, I forgot to tell you about that, but we got to accommodate the congressman. He has a busy schedule. He was supposed to join us last week and he couldn't because of travel. Sometimes things change because of votes. So we will be streaming at the 6th, which is this Wednesday, right? Am I right? Is the 6th this Wednesday? Anyone in the audience want to contribute by telling me what date the 6th is, what day of the week it is? That is the, come on.
That's a Thursday, Katie.
Oh, sorry. Okay. We are streaming on Thursday this week. Good to know. Thank you, Brad. All right. So Thursday, August 6th is our next Katie Halper Show. We may do one before, but we may not. We'll let you know. But either way, we're definitely streaming on Thursday, August 6th. Thank you, everyone, for contributing. I was just making sure that you are on your toes and prepared. Please do become Patreon supporters or YouTube supporters. So you can do that by going to patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. That's a great way to support the show, but also get bonus content. You can also join our YouTube membership program, and that is just by doing subscribe and then join. Right, Brad? That's the process to become a YouTube member. If you are agnostic, I mean, if you're someone who likes being on YouTube and that's your thing, then of course we embrace and welcome and are grateful for the YouTube membership. If you could go either way, don't listen, YouTube. If you can go either way, please do a Patreon, because they give you keep more of it financially. But we love YouTube and everything it represents and everything it does. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to be bringing on to the show. I've had him on, but it's been a while, so really excited to have him back on. Ron Placone, who is a great comedian, and he's bringing his own show, Anti-Fascist Pasta Night, to the Fringe Festival. So welcome back, Ron.
Yeah, Anti-Pasta Fascist Night. That's a different show. I think someone's doing that down the street, but I'm Anti-Fascist Pasta Night. Yeah, good to see you, Katie. It's been way too long.
I know. Yeah, that would be a terrible show to walk into.
Right?
But that can be your next thing. You can do like a send up, a parody of fascists.
There you go. Yes, that'll be
gluten-free fascists. Yeah,
gluten-free. that'll be 2027's run.
Exactly.
Get it ready now.
So tell us about this Anti-Fascist Pasta Night, which is actually is a phenomenon, but it's also the name of your one-person show. But tell us the idea and history behind it.
Yeah, so anti-fascist pasta nights are a thing, and they're mostly in Italy, but they're also all around the world. And it all started when Mussolini was taken out of power. First of all, Mussolini was anti-pasta. He wanted people to not eat pasta. He said, "Oh, pasta makes you weak. We need to eat meat," and stuff like that. And then he took away coffee as well. And he did a lot of stuff in between there. But then the Italian people decided they're going to kill him. But food-wise, pasta and coffee were the big things. He decided, I'm going to take away one of the favorite foods of a group of people. Then I'm going to take away their ability to be caffeinated. And he thought it was going to work out for him. It did not.
Yeah.
But
I mean, forget the fascism part. This is actually more disturbing.
right.
This idea. Yeah.
So when he was removed from power, there was a group of partisans who started serving free pasta in the streets.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and so it became a tradition, Anti-Fascist Pasta Night, all throughout Italy, and it recently kind of spread around the world. And this year, there were ones in other parts of Europe, and then there were some here in North America. The main time to celebrate it is July 25th, which was like last week. We did an actual
Happy belated.
Yeah, right. We did an actual anti-fascist pasta night in Los Angeles in the San Pedro neighborhood where I live. And we had a bunch of comics there. Jake Flores was there. Graham Elwood was there. Drennan Davis, Dana Jacques. We had a really fun lineup, and we had music. And we all sang Bella Ciao at the end.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah, and it was
Partisan
really
anthem.
cool. And there was it was a really cool vibe. And there were ones in, I think New York had one, Philly had one, Boston had one. I think Providence, Rhode Island had one. So it was kind of, it's a cultural thing. And I was entertaining the idea of calling the show that because I talk about it in the show. And then I also talk about being Italian American and some of the misconceptions around being Italian American, because and I'm sure especially being in New York, it's like it's commonly associated with this right-wing reactionary politics, like rah, Columbus Day, Chris Christie, Rudy Giuliani, rah rah. And that certainly exists. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't, but there's always been this big reaction against all that. I mean, there has been a ton of anarchist thought linked to Italian Americans over the years, a lot of union efforts. Italian immigrants were a really, really big part of that. And a lot of it started up in Vermont with like the stoneworkers and stuff like that.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know there was a big presence in Vermont of Italians.
Yeah, they did. I think it was limestone or some kind of stone. I want to say it was limestone. And a lot of them were working in that industry when they came to the States, and they had unions over there. So they kind of brought it to the States. So there's a huge kind of leftist history amidst Italian Americans. There's been anti-Columbus Day protests led by Italian Americans since the 30s. So there's always
no
been...
idea that went back that far. Yeah. That's like very ahead of its, time.
Right. Because this was pre-people's history, right? But so that's always existed, and people try to pretend like this group is some monolith. And for the first time in my lifetime, at least that I'm aware of, there's organizations pushing back against this. There's a group called Piace. There's a historian named Stephen Chirilli. There's a group
pushing back against the fascism, not against the anti-fascist pasta night.
Pushing back against the fascism. Yeah. Pushing back against the fascism, and also just pushing back against this idea that Italian Americans are some monolith politically, and just kind of saying, hey, a lot of us don't share this part. We celebrate the food and the culture and all that, but we don't celebrate this other stuff, and we do feel differently. And for some reason, we're written out of the conversation all the time.
I mean, it kind of reminds me of there's the anti-fascist Italian American community, and there's the anti-Zionist Jewish American community, right? And obviously you don't have like an Italian APAC, but I would say that, Jews have been able to somewhat, create a real challenge to the perception of a Zionist monolith. I mean, something we obviously still struggle with, and more Jews need to be anti-Zionist, etc. And you guys don't have the same thing. Like there's not like an active like genocide going on that claims to be in your name. But I do think that there's a similar thing with kind of like reclaiming your identity, or not even reclaiming it, because it's been there, as you pointed out. Like people know about, the Italian communists, about Gramsci, but less so about the Italian Americans. And so I think that's great to do. And do you deal with a lot of people thinking you're Irish because of your hair color?
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Yeah. St. Patty's Day, I'm always popular at a bar, and I'm actually not Irish at all. My wife is, but when we went to, like, when we were in Dublin and stuff like that, we went to all the immigration centers, and she put in her last name and a ton of stuff came up, you
Right.
know, like of heritage and possible relatives and stuff. I put in Placone just for fun, and they were like, "Dude, go to Italy. What are you doing
Right.
here? You're not
Exactly.
going to find anything here."
Right. Yeah. And when did your family? Oh, two questions before that. What is the significance of the July 25th? You said.
Yeah, so that's when they celebrate Mussolini falling, and
Okay.
so that's just happens to be the date. But
Right.
part of the reason I settled on the name Anti-Fascist Pasta Night was one because I just got a kick out of it. I just
Yeah.
thought it was a fun name. I do talk about it in the show, and then I kind of likened the Italian American part into it too, because I was seeing all these groups in New York kind of reclaiming this thing or you know amplifying it because
Right.
like you said it's already been there. And that was really inspiring. The Italians for Zohran account, which is now Italian anti-fascist, like that's how they rebranded themselves
Right.
post the campaign. They were doing a lot of amazing things. You know, there was that kind of standoff, I think around Columbus Day where like the macaroni, which is what we
Macaroni.
call them. That's what we call
Yeah.
them now. And shout out to George DeStefano who coined that. But yeah, like the Macaroni sect was there and the anti-fascist sect was there and they were clashing. It was literally like that episode of Sopranos
Right.
in real life, if anyone remembers that episode. But yeah, so seeing them do that, and I think it was actually Matt Leck who I talked about this to. We talked about how just
From the
right
Majority
now,
Report.
yeah, like right now, reclaiming radical history is so important to figure out a way forward. Like it's time that people know that the people in North Dakota love their public bank because they
Right.
know what a public bank can do, and they probably wouldn't have that public bank if it wasn't for the anarchist farmers. It's time for people to know these things and to know
Right.
that we didn't get the New Deal because FDR was a nice guy. We got the New
Right.
Deal because anarchists and socialists and communists and labor leaders and just regular working people were pretty much in unison saying, you got to give a little here because we're fed up and we're not going to take it anymore.
Right. Yeah.
We need to reclaim that. So, you know, I'm trying to do my part of that. I'm an Italian American, so I want to amplify all this stuff. And that's a part of the show too. And a lot of it's about just what's happening in the United States right now.
And where is your family from, and when did they come over? And do you come from a political family, or did you kind of find your own politics?
Well, as far as the micro level, a little bit of both. So first of all, my family is mostly from Avellino, which, you know, you mentioned off mic, the ginger parents might link to southern Italy, or northern Italy,
Right.
but actually my relatives are southern Italy, and most Italian Americans are because that's where people were poor.
Right.
So most Italian Americans have descendants in the South, but my family is reasonably progressive. I mean, my parents are retired now. My dad was an academic. My mom worked in admin in academia as well. So fairly academic minded family, and they are they're fairly progressive. We butt heads a little bit on some things, but for the most part, and these days every now and again they'll say something that surprises me in a good way, you know, like they were saying something about in fact something about Gaza recently, because I am not Jewish myself, but I do have Jewish members of my family, and
Okay.
and so you know,
Pizza
like that.
bagels. We call them pizza bagels.
Right.
If they're half, yeah.
Yeah. And so my niece and nephews are my special little pizza bagels.
Nice.
But yeah, so that is, you know, something that does come up, and you know, recently my parents, you know, not that I expected them to be you know, totally the other way or anything like
Right.
that, but I was worried there might be a little bit of a Bill Maher influence in
Oh, yeah.
their thoughts, but there wasn't, and
Yeah.
I was very happy about that.
By the way, lest people think you're exaggerating, here is an actual New York Times article from showing the Mussolini war on pasta. This is from August 8th, 1926. Spaghetti finds a foe in Mussolini.
Mhm.
Italy's dictator threatens to substitute potatoes for the national dish, which is
Yeah.
a terrible idea. The climax of fascism has been reached. Nothing since the black shirts were first donned can compare in its way with the importance of Premier Mussolini's announcement that spaghetti must go, its place to be taken by potatoes. To help conserve wheat, Italy faces a spaghetti-less future. Yeah, so that is fascinating and was clearly a terrible mood. But yeah, it's really interesting. So let's actually, you brought up the Italians for Zohran. Let's take a look at this video that you did.
Mamdami's trying to erase us. He wiped Little Italy off the map. No, he didn't. First of all, it wasn't even his map. That map was made when Eric Adams was in office. Second of all, it was meant to focus on more active immigrant communities, not just symbolic ones. So yes, Little Italy wasn't on that map. Neither was Little Germany or Little Syria. And finally, he's putting it back on the map anyway, so yeah, we won. We've been sharing that video. Yeah, I couldn't help but notice the video you guys shared excluded the part where he mentioned it wasn't even his map. It's almost like you're just really angry that a social democrat is mayor of New York. He's a communist. Andrew Cuomo's a Democrat, and he's plenty social, especially with the ladies. Oh boy, I'll try to explain that one later. There's a photo of Mamdami flipping off a Columbus statue. That's violent. Yes, I only hope someday the statue recovers. It's not funny. Columbus is our guy. He represents us. No, he doesn't. He was a horrible human by every measurable metric, and there have been anti-Columbus Day actions led by Italian Americans since the 1930s. You know, you always love to cry discrimination and exclusion. Meanwhile, for years, you have tried to pretend that every single Italian American who doesn't share your worldview doesn't even exist. You want to talk about inclusion? How about starting there? How about this October we actually have a real historical conversation? What? I can't hear you. You're breaking up. I'm sorry. I can't hear you. I'm going to have to call you back.
That was macaroni.
That was macaroni.
Yeah. And so everyone, macaroni, the dish, the Italian food, and then macaroni, throwing in the MAGA in there. Yeah, that's very clever. Yeah.
It's nice to have that to have that available, and that's traveled worldwide. Again, shout out the New York-based journalist George DeStefano coined that, and he's been carrying the torch for a very, very long time of Italian Americans aren't a monolith, and
Right.
yeah, he coined that, and it got everywhere. Like people in Italy use it now too,
Oh, wow.
which is awesome.
And it's actually scary because Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, has some fascist tendencies herself.
She's a fascist. I mean,
Yeah.
she's not quite as extreme as what we got going on here, I would say. But yeah, she's a fascist. Italy is really interesting right now as far as what's going on because, yeah, they have Giorgia Meloni. They have also been so outspoken for Palestine,
Yeah.
and they have had general strike after general strike after general strike, and the dockers have refused to load the weapons heading to Israel, and they've been doing that for years. This is not the first time. That's why, I mean, the anti-fascist in that video had on a Livorno t-shirt. That is on purpose. I also have a cat named Livorno, and it's not just Livorno, by the way. It's the ports in Genoa have been doing it too, so I don't want to make it out like it's
Right.
just one port because it isn't. But
Don't be portist. Don't be port elitist. Yeah.
yes. So yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. And the most popular figure culturally in Italy right now, arguably at least, is Zero Calcare, who's an unapologetic anti-fascist cartoonist. I don't know if you've ever watched any of his series on Netflix.
No.
But I mean, that second season in particular never would have gotten made in the United States. I mean, it's literally about fighting Nazis as Antifa in Italy. Like that's
Right.
what the series is about.
Yeah.
And it's I was surprised it was even available in the US, but probably because it's a different country. They were like, whatever. But yeah, I mean, he's an unapologetic, anti-fascist comic book artist, has a bunch of like lefty punk bands in his show and stuff like that. And he's huge over there right now. And there's been, again, protests after protests for Palestine. So it's really interesting what's going on. And just in other parts of the world, too. I mean, on June 13th, the fascists were marching throughout the UK and throughout other parts of Europe, and they got driven away in every single situation.
Wow. And by the way, what did you when did you start looking into the kind of radical Italian American history that exists, both the history and its present day existence? What made you look into that, and what were your sources?
Well, a lot of it was some of it was just stuff that I kind of just knew about and kind of wondered, why doesn't anyone talk about this side of it? Why is it all so one-sided? But I just sort of was like, well, I guess that's just the way it is. But then it was the Italians for Zohran account, and the other organization, Piace, learning about the existence of those things and seeing what they were doing. And I'm like, well, if other people are really, spreading this message, I should do my part, especially since I want to talk about it in my show, but in particular in October, the Italians for Zohran account, because October is when there's quote unquote Columbus Day. The Italians for Zohran account every day in October posted a piece of leftist oriented Italian American history every single day. And it was something totally different each day. And it was awesome. And shout out to Stephen Cerulli. He's a historian, Italian American historian, who curated pretty much most of that stuff in collaboration with the account. And a lot of it was stuff I didn't know about. I mean, even though I know the basic propaganda around Columbus Day and how it kind of came to be, there were even layers to that thing that I was unaware of, that I learned about for the first time. And there's even a connection to Mussolini, because some of those statues were from him, because they wanted Italian Americans to kind of feel this sort of connection to Italy still, but they wanted to paint this idea. Well, it's like, well, you're not these WAFs, you're not totally white, but you're also not these others either. You're this in between thing, and Columbus is your guy. And it was it was baked into racism and xenophobia and just
ziti, baked into the ziti,
big time. And some people bought it because, I mean, it's hard to resist a good bowl of baked ziti. But yeah, so that was a big thing. And around that same time, I was thinking about my next Fringe show, in the process of naming it. So yeah, that all kind of found its way in, and it took shape.
And where can
like a spaghetti noodle, it took shape.
Yeah, exactly. Like a manicotti congealing. Where can people watch this show? People who are at Fringe, and if not, where can they find out more about your work if they can't get to the Fringe Festival?
Yeah, so I'm gonna be at the Fringe Festival. My run starts on August 6th, which is a Thursday.
It's a
Thursday. So yeah, I go August 6th through 30th at the Westport Oracle. I'm part of the free Fringe, so you don't need tickets, just show up. So anyone who's going to be at the Fringe, come say hello. My show is at 3:45 each day. And yeah, I'm really excited about it. It's the most excited I've ever been about a stand-up hour. The previews have been going great. The New York preview, we actually sold out, which I was beyond thrilled about. And we won a social justice award too. So I'm really looking forward to the official premiere. For those who will not be in Edinburgh at the Fringe Festival, please do follow me online. I'm Ron Placone on all the socials. You can see my movie Left at Wall now. It's even available on YouTube, free with ads, and it's also free on Tubi. So I recommend watching it for free. Why not? Get a free movie. Left at Wall is the name of that movie.
How do you spell it? Left?
Just Left at Wall, just the 3 words, Left at Wall. And it's yeah, you can watch it right after this stream is over, after the episode's over. You can bop over somewhere else and watch the movie. You can just type it in and it'll come up on YouTube. And then also I will humbly mention one thing real quick. I am the new co-host of Disinfo Detox with Nolan Higdon, and we are going to be launching in cooperation with Project Censored very soon. Right now, we're still at the beginning stages. We're still at the soft launch phase. So we've been streaming on Wednesdays, and you can catch that if you follow my Substack. I'm just Ron Placone on Substack, and he is Nolan Higdon on Substack. So we're in the soft launch phase now, so you can catch it now on Wednesdays. But we're going to be launching with Project Censored here very shortly once everything is settled. So,
and he's like a big media critic, right?
Yeah, he's an academic, and I have a past life as a pseudo academic. I got out after masters, so yeah, we started collaborating some, and then this idea kind of took off. So,
what was your master's in?
Communication.
Okay.
Yeah. I was gonna maybe go on for my PhD, but I don't know. I decided to give the comedy thing a chance, and thought it didn't work out. Yeah.
I mean, you probably make more money as a comedian than you would have as a PhD, so you probably made the safer decision.
I did. I made especially since the Academy's over now, which is also talked about in the show.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, Ron, thank you so much for coming on. We will link to your show so people know where it is. But it sounds like you don't need to get tickets, so just walk over if you're in Edinburgh, and come back on. And yeah, let's talk to you after you launch your next show with that you just mentioned.
Thanks a lot, Katie. So good to see you again.
You too.
All the
Have
best.
a great day.
You
Bye.
too. Cheers.
Cheers. All right. That was great. That was the best anti-fascist comedy Italian-American interview we've done in a long time. No, I saw a video of the show and it's great. So people should definitely see it. Also, Ron writes a cat, what do you call this? Like a cartoon. I'm so dumb about this stuff. I think it's called a cartoon, right? Ron, is it called a cartoon? Yeah, okay, it is a cartoon about his cat Lucy. We are going to keep the show going. Now, please do, if you haven't already, do like the stream. That is a free way for you to support the show. Make sure that more people come to it. Tweet it out, Facebook it out, Instagram it out, TikTok it out, because we want to make sure that people come and see the great guests that we have on. Give a thumbs up. Join the Patreon, patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. You get exclusive content like the entire interview that we did with John Mearsheimer and Yanis Varoufakis, which people are loving, and more exclusive content down the pike. We are honored to bring back onto the show two fan faves, show faves, Rania Khalek of Breakthrough News and Medea Benjamin of Code Pink. Welcome back, ladies.
Hello.
Hi. Thank
How's
you
it
so
going?
much. Good. You guys?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Hi. Hello, Rania.
Hello, Medea. Hello, Katie. Wow,
Hi.
what a fabulous group of women.
Yes, I know. We were on a panel together once, right? Weren't we all on a panel about
I
Hillary?
feel like that sounds correct.
Ages ago.
Yeah. Well, nice
like in
reunion.
New York, I think.
Yeah,
I
of
think
course.
in-
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is
Yeah.
this is one of the iterations of that show I've been wanting to launch, which is the lefty version of The View. So we can consider this an audition for that. But you know, we just did, and Rania, you're joining us from Beirut. Medea, you are joining us from DC. The Code Pink House, as you can tell from the pink behind you.
That's the orange behind me.
Oh, but there's pink too. Pink
Yes,
accent.
pink on one side. That's
Okay, yeah. I mean, is it the orange or is this code orange?
in between.
Okay, got it. Things are more urgent, so it makes sense than they've ever been. So we just had this segment on fascism and anti-fascism. And speaking of anti-fascism and fascism, both of the organizations that you are part of have made the State Department's new Cuba report. Cuba, the capital of 21st.
Well, actually, Breakthrough News did not make the report, but Code Pink did.
I'm so sorry. I don't mean to give you guys a complex. I thought you had made it also.
No, I didn't.
Wow.
We didn't make the team.
You made, okay, so actually this is an important clarification. Okay, so Code Pink made it into the report. Now I know that you read the entire report. Medea, can you tell us about the report? And then Rania, you can tell us about what happened to you. I guess you guys were just subpoenaed along with the People's Forum and Tricontinental Research Institute. I want to bring that up because I don't want to make you feel like a loser. Just because you didn't make that report.
Much appreciated.
Yes. So you tell us, Medea, about the report you're in, and then we'll talk about the attacks on you guys. Rania.
So this is the State Department report that came out. It's a 99-page screed about what this fantastical Cuban being the vector, the center of a global revolution that includes on the international side, Russia and China and Iran, but really focuses on Cuba's infiltration into the US, going back many decades, spanning a lot of it is around civil rights uprisings in the US, Stokely Carmichael, Asada Shakur, Angela Davis, on and on about connections that actually existed during the 60s, the 70s, but then jumping to say that today there is this conspiracy that Cuba's fingerprints or footprints are in all of these movements in the US, whether it is student uprising on campuses, anti-ICE, Black Lives Matter, you name it, Cuba is involved and has infiltrated these movements, influenced these movements. And I want to read you what this is part of in case people don't understand. A hemispheric Marxist revolution that wants to erase the United States from the earth.
Wow. Where would we even go?
Yeah, right. The singular goal of the Cuban Revolution has been conquering the United States. And then it's not just that, it's a revolution against Western civilization itself. So it is quite a crazy report. But what is so important about it is that, one, it comes from the State Department, so it is official. No matter if it was AI that wrote it, which is what some people are saying. But it is also put in this context. And I know, Rania, you talk about this context of the National Security Memorandum that was put out last year that talks about how the U.S. is now going to get the go-ahead to investigate and prosecute the far left. And then more recently, this meeting that came together that the State Department hosted of over 60 representatives from over 60 countries to come together to talk about how on the global level we are going to fight this far left extremists, including domestic terrorists in all of these countries. And then on top of that is the investigation that's being done of Code Pink about the Cuba trip. So all of that, I think you have to put in context. And of course, then Rania can talk about the context for the subpoena that they have received.
Right. Yes. And I was on that trip to Cuba, and I have to, so far I have not been received anything in the mail, but we'll see. Yeah, knock on wood. Yeah. Rania, please answer. I have to get up to adjust my AC, so I'll be off screen for a second, but I'm listening to you. So yes, please tell us about your own experience of our Marco Rubio's targeting.
Yeah, as Marco Rubio and Stephen Miller target people who were just trying to deliver humanitarian aid to the Cuban people who Marco Rubio and Stephen Miller are starving. There was another angle of this attack on Breakthrough News, and that is that we received a subpoena from the House Ways and Means Committee in Congress demanding our internal communications, which is First Amendment protected materials. Now, this comes, of course, on the heels of what Medea was talking about, the anti-communism summit that took place a couple of weeks ago. That was held by Marco Rubio and Stephen Miller, where they basically tried to insinuate that ideas on the left are the equivalent of violence and terrorism. They talked about something that they're calling far left extremism, far left terrorism, far left radicalism, without ever defining what any of that means, which is very dangerous, right? Because they're literally trying to say, like, if you are, or just like we are, we're against murdering people in Cuba with an oil blockade. We're against dropping bombs on babies in Iran and on Gaza, right? That somehow is the equivalent of violence, is what they're saying. So that summit happened a couple of weeks ago.
So being anti-violence is violence.
Basically. So that summit happened a couple of weeks ago, and they promised that there were more terrorist designations to come. You heard Stephen Miller reference that NSPM 7 National Security Directive that is targeting the domestic left in the U.S. as being a part of that program. And then a few days later, you had the State Department publishing this insane Cuba report that Medea just talked about, which basically listed, people from all of these different organizations and individuals themselves, including elected officials, sitting mayors, like LA Mayor Karen Bass was on that list, by the way, and I'll get to why that matters, but also Code Pink, the DSA, the People's Forum, the National Lawyers Guild, as all being agents of Cuba, and by, I guess, tangentially also agents of any other American adversary. They listed in that report. They said Iran, Russia, China, Hezbollah, Hamas.
Wow.
It was just completely absurd. Like this, we're supposed to believe this tiny island of Cuba that the U.S. is literally strangling to death, where 1,800 babies have died in excess because of that strangling, is also puppeteering what they call the destruction of American civilization. They literally say Cuba's trying to conquer America. It's so absurd.
Rania, that also included as individuals in the report are people who attended the wedding of my co-director, Jody Evans. And it was because they attended the wedding that they were listed. So that was Ben Cohen of Ben & Jerry's. It was Amy Goodman of Democracy Now! It was
attending weddings. Now is now the equivalent of working as an agent of Cuba.
The wedding was in Jamaica.
Well, too close.
The guilt by association is completely absurd. It would be so laughable if it wasn't so dangerous. So I just want to say, I'm putting like what happened to Breakthrough News in the context of all of this escalation against the US left. And then so we received, a few days after that Cuba report, we received a subpoena from the House Ways and Means Committee, like I said, demanding our internal communications. Now, this is a part of a concerted effort by Republicans in Congress who've been harassing us for years. They keep pushing this false claim that, our journalism is a full part of a foreign plot. And that's come from other members of Congress, but the Ways and Means Committee specifically started sending us letters back in February of this year. And in those letters, they kept referencing our coverage specifically of Israel's genocide in Gaza and of our coverage of the opposition across the U.S. to the ICE killings and kidnappings around the world. So literally just going after our viewpoints, upset about our reporting. And they sent several letters. And I just want to say also, by the way, you guys, these letters, we almost every time learned about them first from Fox News.
Of course.
Which is really interesting. In fact, the first letter we received from them back in February, we didn't even get the letter ourselves. It didn't even come to us or to our lawyers. We learned about it because it was published at Fox News. So there's definitely some sort of collaboration going on between Fox News and these members of Congress to try to drum up hostile media coverage of us and other left progressive organizations. And they've done that I think they've done that as well with Code Pink. In the case of, Medea, you received supposedly, according to Fox News, a subpoena from the DOJ over your humanitarian aid trip to Cuba, but you actually never got a subpoena. So sometimes they're just like making things up. Go ahead, Medea.
No, but yes, we heard about it from Fox News as well, and only found it because it was in Jody Evans' spam box.
Wow.
But it was but it wasn't a subpoena. It was a list of questions.
Not a subpoena, but I forgot. And Jody reminded me that we actually did get a subpoena last year from one of the committees, the Natural Resources, and it was about us talking about clean energy and things about, the problem of big oil, and that these were supposedly China talking points. Amazing. And so the subpoena was about our relationship to China talking points and clean energy. I forgot about that whole thing. The other thing is, like yesterday, I was in the Senate and Senator Josh Hawley, I was asking him about, how are you going to vote on the Iran war powers? And he says, "Oh, I'm so glad you're being investigated now. You're being investigated." And I said, "For what?" And he said, "Your China connections." And, they've been saying that over and over again, and maybe they are investigating us, but the truth is that there's nothing there. There's no there. Right. So every time, we're told that we're being investigated, they don't follow up because there's nothing to follow up. I mean, it is like we have a donor who is an American who lives in China, and that's the connection.
Wow.
So this is part real. What's going on here is you have right wingers in Congress that are completely abusing congressional investigative authority to target viewpoints they disagree with. That's what's happening here. And it's interesting you mentioned energy, Medea, because there was waves of this under Trump where they were targeting the environmental justice movement. basically driven by Trump's allies in Congress. But the Ways and Means Committee, which is currently targeting Breakthrough News, if this were like their entire reason for existing is to review tax policy, right? So they say, oh, we're just reviewing nonprofits. Well, if this was really about reviewing nonprofits, there's massive nonprofits across the US that they could be looking into in terms of tax policy. Breakthrough News has a microscopic budget compared to other media outlets in the country, and it's specifically compared to nonprofits across the country. So they've said in previous letters that they're going after us because they don't like our viewpoints. They say we're too soft on adversaries like China and Russia as well. So like, this is about viewpoints. This is about the First Amendment. It's not about a tax status. I think it's really important to understand that. And in the case of Breakthrough News, I mean, they're also going after other small nonprofits. But in the case of Breakthrough News, they're targeting an independent media outlet. And I just want to point out, we are expressing the majority sentiment of the people in the US, which I think is interesting here because, you know, when you talk about the kinds of stuff that they're upset that we're reporting on, if we're talking about the genocide in Gaza and the movement to stop it, or ICE terror across the US, majority sentiment is on our side here.
Right. It's not fringe.
Well, exactly. Well, they're the ones who are fringe. Like, you don't try to criminalize dissent when you're winning the argument. You do it when you're losing the argument. And we know that the Trump administration is deeply unpopular. They have midterms coming up. Meanwhile, you look across the country at these, primary races that are taking place, and progressives and socialist candidates are winning these primaries, which is why they had a whole section on DSA in that Cuba report. They're very upset about DSA doing well in elections because the majority of the country is against the genocide in Gaza. People want free healthcare and they want to stop funding wars. Trump is currently, overseeing the most unpopular war, I think, in American history, the Iran war. So like, the foreign plot smear is all they really have left because they can't win their arguments on the merits of their arguments. So they're just accusing all of us of being some part of a foreign operation. There's no proof of this. They just, like Medea said, you just keep saying it over and over and over again. I just wanted to mention a few numbers here because they can't arrest their way out of this. They really can't. I don't think they can criminalize their way out of this. Net favorability towards Israel has dropped 67 points in 8 years. It was from plus 51 during Trump's first term to now minus 16. That's roughly 90 million Americans who've literally changed their minds in just the last few years. You now have 55% of Americans who want to reduce or completely end military aid to Israel. So this is not some fringe opinion. This is the majority of the country. And another thing that they kept saying in these letters against Breakthrough News, prior letters, is they kept accusing us of using anti-American rhetoric, which is also something that Stephen Miller says NSPM 7 is going after, anti-American rhetoric, whatever that means. And it really is just like summoning the ghost of the House Un-American Activities Committee, which the Cuba report that Medea was talking about also proudly referenced explicitly, which is just utterly shocking because, I went to school in the US. I think you guys did too. And we were taught that McCarthyism was a bad thing. But This administration is saying it's a good thing and wants to openly resurrect it. But one thing that I keep saying that I think is really important is that during McCarthyism and that entire era, there was all these congressional committees doing what a lot of the committees today are trying to do, but they were able to get the public on board. And that is why it worked so well. But I just referenced some opinions just on Israel. I didn't even go to the opinions that are also on our side when it comes to so many other issues that I don't think they'll be able to get the public on board with this one. And they have a limited window to still do it in because midterms are coming up. Right. Trump, I don't think, is going to be able to be president forever, but never say never. But all of that's to say they are losing, and this is what losers do. That doesn't mean it's not dangerous. We shouldn't laugh it off. We shouldn't dismiss it because we all have to stand together against this. We have to show solidarity with any organization that is being targeted, is in the crosshairs right now. And, I'll tell you what you can do to help Breakthrough News specifically here. But this is part of a broader attack on the left. We mentioned that summit, the Cuba report. Don't forget also you had the Prairie Land case not too long ago where you had 8 anti-ICE protesters in Texas who were sentenced to between 30 to 100 years in prison for protesting ICE in ICE detention center. We can go on and on. They're looking to shape an entire campaign that goes after people who fund movements and who fund organizations that organize and educate. That's happening in conjunction in addition to this as well. So they're going after funders, they're going after organizers, they're going after journalists. They are trying to go after the organized progressive movement in America to try to shut it down because they can't defeat it in a legal way. So all of that's to say, like, we all need to keep our eyes on this because they're literally trying to take the war on terror playbook and use it domestically. And if people are outraged about them coming after a media outlet like Breakthrough News, which they should be, even if you hate Breakthrough News, even if you don't like our ideas, you have to recognize that this is an attack on freedom of on a free press. So in that, on that note, I encourage people to go to breakthroughnews.org/donate. And please, if you can, donate to our legal defense fund. You can also just go to Breakthrough News in the pop-up window, and there's a pop-up window that will come up to tell you can do one of two things. You can go sign our petition to tell the House Ways and Means Committee to stop their witch hunt into Breakthrough News, and you can donate there as well. But I highly encourage people to please, help us do that, because it starts with Breakthrough News. But if they succeed, which I don't think they will, but let's say they do, they will continue to go after the entire left and progressive media ecosystem to shut it down.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, Rania, because great analysis as always, but they don't want you guys to exist because you are kind of like a counterweight. If you think about it, how they use Fox News as their like press arm, right? That's how they like announce their decisions. It's like Fox News is literally their PR firm. So they don't want anything that challenges that. They don't want any media that challenges those narratives. And in terms of, what the activism that you engage in, Medea, let's take a look at why. I mean, I think Rania has made it very clear why they're so threatened by Breakthrough News. In case people want examples of the dangerous stuff that you guys do, and I'm being sarcastic because it's not dangerous, but it is dangerous for the powers that be. But let's watch a recent video of you, Medea, and fellow activists confronting U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz, and Florida Congresswoman Maria Elvira Salazar about the blockade of Cuba.
Ambassador, could you please respond to those questions about the blockade on Cuba? You lied here at the UN saying there's no blockade.
Mr. President, there's a lot of talk today of an embargo. And indeed there is one. It's staring us all in the face. It's the embargo the Cuban regime mercilessly imposes on its own people decade after decade after decade.
There is a blockade. The president says there is a blockade. It is an evil, evil, evil policy that is hurting 11 million Cuban people. There is not a drop of oil that the U.S. has allowed in since the end of March. That is an evil, demonic, satanic, unconscionable policy. The Cuban people are starving, and you are doing that.
You are responsible for their deaths. Their blood is on your hands. The problem is that you don't listen. You have just one track.
The problem is I go to Cuba all the time, and you never go to Cuba. I see people who don't have water, don't have electricity.
Who has provoked?
That's Maria Elvira Salazar from Florida, Congresswoman.
Trump. He said there won't be a drop of oil going in, and there hasn't been.
What about the last? I think that you mean well, but you have been fooled.
No, but
you drank the Kool-Aid.
I talk to people on the street who hate the government. I talk to people on the street who like the government. None of them.
Why don't we have the government open up
oil?
But
this
democracy.
Policy
I need democracy.
Cruel. It's cruel. And you don't mind that children die in the incubators while this happens. You have to have a heart. Go to Cuba. Go to Cuba and see. Talk to people in Cuba, not Miami.
Wow. What's fascinating is that she was born in the United States, and she has an accent. I'm not saying this is not like an anti-immigrant thing, or I'm not mocking her, but it's fascinating because it just speaks to like the strength of the Cuban American like community, where you literally grow up in Miami and you're so surrounded by people from Cuba, yet you don't go to Cuba, that she actually has an accent. I just find that fascinating. Like, she has a Spanish accent, even though she was raised in the United States. Because
it took me a while to realize that she has never been to Cuba.
Right.
The same with Marco Rubio, to think he has never been to Cuba. And I'm learning about all of these Southern Florida right-wing Cuban Americans. They haven't been to Cuba, and they don't have any family left in Cuba. And that's why they can have this cruel policy, because they have no feedback from people in Cuba who are suffering from this policy. It really is and then, in that clip you have, after that, I was yelling at her, Cuba no es Miami, Cuba no es Miami, Cuba is not Miami. And it's so cruel to think that you can pretend that you care about the Cuban people and you're doing all of this because you care so much about them. And the other thing, Marco Rubio says is for this administration, democracy is capitalism. So if you open up the economy, you privatize everything, that is freedom, that is democracy. Well, the Cuban government, because it's really against the wall right now, it has opened up and announced all of these new openings for selling off private and state enterprises to private companies, to have all kinds of ways that foreigners can invest in Cuba. And yet the sanctions are preventing that from happening. So even if Cuba does what the U.S. wants them to do in terms of the economy and openings, it doesn't work. And of course, what they really want is to get rid of the government. They understand it's Cuba no es Venezuela tampoco, it's not Venezuela either. Right. And so they're stuck. And so what the policy is, just keep starving them, a policy that was announced in 1960 with a memorandum from a State Department official saying, we have to make them miserable. We have to starve them. So
because Castro's too popular.
Yeah.
That's what they said. Like there's too much support for Castro in Cuba that the only way we can destabilize them is by making them suffer. Yeah, exactly. The Mallory memo. And by the way, little aside, I see a lot of comments saying that's not a Cuban accent. I don't know what it's. Her accent, again, it's not, I guess it's a Miami accent, people are saying. But the point is it's shaped by people who are from Cuba. And ironically, though, their parents' generation or grandparents' generation. But these people, ironically, even though they have an accent, they have not been to Cuba. But sorry, that's not as important as what you were saying, Medea. But yeah, I mean, I think it's such an important point that she's like, I need democracy. No offense, lady. If you believe in democracy, then listen to the people of Cuba, right? If you're all about democracy, you're basically you want to be the dictator of Cuba and decide that you want the political system you want. And in the meantime, you're fine with people suffering. And as you pointed out, Medea, and I can attest to this too, having been to Cuba, no matter what people's views of the government there are, nobody and there is there's a big spectrum. Nobody wants to be deprived of oil.
Well, that's right. And another thing we didn't talk about that Cuba report is how it says that Cuba has its hands in every country in Latin America trying to manipulate. And, it's so ironic coming at a time when the U.S. has openly revived the Monroe Doctrine, or the Donroe Doctrine, is now running the Venezuelan government, is using U.S. pressure, both the carrot and the stick, to influence elections all over Latin America. And to say that, it's Cuba, this little island that has lost at least 10% of its population in the last few years, is influencing the entire continent, is so crazy, when it's the U.S. that has been doing this on steroids in since this last Trump administration, with Marco Rubio in power.
Yeah, it is unreal, and it's such projection and such inversion. It's they say every accusation is a confession. I wanted to ask both of you about the bipartisan nature of this kind of neo-McCarthyism, because obviously this crackdown is being led by the Republicans under Trump. And it's not, I think that I think it is, it's always it's a fine line. It's we want to be clear-eyed about this. This is a departure and an aberration to some extent, but it also is a continuation of something that happened before, which is the repression and suppression that happens of the left under Democrats as well. But it is ratcheting up. I think we can be honest about that, right? Like we can be critical of Democrats and their complicity while acknowledging that this is a qualitative and quantitative difference. But it's important, and you tweeted about this, Rania. So during an interview with Semaphore this week, Democratic Congresswoman from Michigan, Hillary Scholten, had some interesting things to say about Senate candidate Abdul el Sayed. So let's take a look at that. In an interview with Semaphore, Rep. Hillary Scholten, Democrat of Michigan, was asked whether she plans to support Abdul el Sayed if he wins the Michigan Democratic Senate primary. Her response: I will not stand beside someone who has allowed distinctly anti-American sentiment to enter public dialogue. Okay, and Rania, you responded to this in a tweet where you said, here's a Democrat sounding like Stephen Miller, accusing Abdul el Sayed of being an accomplice to anti-American sentiment. So what do you think this is the result of? Is this because he's brown? Is this because he calls a genocide? Is it both? What is this happen? What's happening here?
So I'm going to address that, but I just really quickly wanted to say this one thing about the Cuba report before I do address that. I hope you don't mind.
Yeah,
because I just to
no,
go back to
Rania, I'm going to silence you I'm going to subpoena you. If you
well, I just think
it's
it was to what you guys made me think of this, to the conversation you were just having about how the U.S. is accusing Cuba of like interfering in everything, and the U.S. is actually interfering in everything, which is absolutely true. But the report goes after Cuba. It says Fidel Castro began plotting armed assaults against neighboring governments after the revolution. That's what it says. Launching expeditions against Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, and Panama in just that year of 1959 alone. The Guardian actually wrote a piece pointing out to that statement that was in the Cuba report that what it fails to mention is that Haiti was then run by Francois Papadoc Duvalier, who killed an estimated 60,000 of his own people. The Dominican Republic was run by Rafael Trujillo, who launched the Parsley Massacre, killing between 20,000 to 35 Haitians. And Nicaragua by the Somoza family, who are credited with the murder of up to 50,000 Nicaraguans. So I just wanted to point out that the report is whining that a bunch of US-backed mass murderers across Latin America are what Cuba allied with popular sentiment in those countries against in the year 1959. Because they're really trying to, this government, when they talk about the Don Roe Doctrine, they're trying to take us back to that time before the Cuban Revolution, when every single country was under the thumb of American empire and was just like a colony of America.
Right.
And in some cases, they've sort of succeeded a little bit in this kind of far right tide across Latin America. But anyways, to your question about, oh, sorry, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think we should add that both Marco Rubio and even Ted Cruz, who said that their families fled the repressive regimes in Cuba, turns out that they fled the Bautista regime that the revolution overthrew. So
yeah, so
like thugs and liars.
Unless they were able to engage in time travel, they were lying and left before Castro's rise. Yeah.
Thugs and liars, these people. But but to what you were saying about that woman who commented on Abdul el Sayed, I think it speaks to a broader issue in the Democratic Party that isn't at all surprising. And that is that, they like to call Trump a fascist. And I absolutely agree. There are fascists in Trump's administration who really scare me and should scare all of us. But instead of being the opposition party against the fascists, the Democrats have been quite silent in the face of this unprecedented, in at least my lifetime, assault on the progressive left across America. I didn't see anybody say a word. I mean, against the Cuba report, Ilhan Omar and I think 10 other progressive Democrats released a statement, and that's nice. But that's 10 Democrats among hundreds in Congress who said nothing. And I suspect the reason for that is because it's kind of like the enemy of my enemy. They hate the DSA. They hate their base. The Democratic leadership hates their base because their base is progressive. And so they would rather just let Stephen Miller and Marco Rubio just like completely bulldoze the left of the Democratic Party so that they don't have to deal with these DSA primaries. I think that's what it's about. And that speaks to what that pretty white blonde lady said about the dark barbarian Abdul el Sayed. That's what it sounded like when she was saying Abdul el Sayed is so well spoken. incredibly
and what's anti-American?
well-spoken.
What anti-American sentiment does he put in?
I mean, it's because she is, unless she thinks that opposing a genocide is anti-American or that supporting healthcare for all is anti-American, maybe she believes that. But what I see there is race baiting. That's pure race baiting to me, pretty explicitly so, and that's tolerated. I mean, you also saw, I think it was last week, there was like that woman who was a surrogate for Haley Stevens, making a comment about being uncomfortable with the fact that Abdul el Sayed has Arabic music or something, or that is speaking Arabic. I didn't know that, by the way. I didn't know he was playing Arabic music. I've never seen that. Not that there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. There's also nothing wrong with speaking Arabic to Arabic speakers. But the fact that sort of bigoted rhetoric is tolerated in the most well-funded wing of the Democratic Party is very upsetting, but I think speaks to the fact that at the end of the day, they will align with Republicans or basically stand by silently and watch rather than stand up against fascists if it means staying in power themselves.
Right. Yeah, it's true, and it's scary. And it's so ironic. All these people talk about Abdul el Sayed being a threat to the Democrats and aiding Republicans. Lady, this woman is not even vowing, won't even say that she'll help him defeat the Republican. And then you have a former Biden aide saying that he won't vote for him if he wins.
Because they would rather the Republican win than him. And that's the problem. I mean, the Democratic Party is not a Democratic Party, small d Democrat. It is a corporation that is beholden to its donors at the end of the day. And these are the soulless ghouls who will speak the language of what anybody who gives them money tells them to speak, whether it's AIPAC, whether it's the pharmaceutical industry, whether it's the weapons industry. That is what they are beholden to. And so, they're making tons of money doing that. And people who are trying to come into this party to reform it, which I don't think that's possible, but by all means, go ahead and try. But the people who are coming into this party trying to reform it or trying to actually reflect the sentiments of the base of this party, they are a major threat to that donor base. And so this is totally predictable and it's actually quite logical behavior.
Right. Yeah. Well, I want to, for the last section of this interview, I would love to ask you, Rania, since you are based in Beirut, I want to ask you about stuff that's happening in the region that you're in. So obviously the war between the U.S. and Iran has been escalating again. It's the United States that's responsible for that. And last week, President Trump met with the president of Lebanon, Joseph Aoun. Let's take a listen to some comments he made during this press conference.
The Israeli army withdraw from Lebanon. Is there a clear timeline?
They're in the process of doing that. They're in the process of redeploying to other sections. And again, they get along very well. That was a great agreement they signed with Lebanon, and they're redeployed.
Is there a timeline?
So that is him. He's saying that Israel is in the process of withdrawing from Lebanon, and he's saying they're in the process of redeploying. So what is your reaction to that, Rania?
They don't use the word withdraw. They use the word redeploy in place of withdraw. It's a very confusing term. I don't understand why. Maybe it's because that gives them the option to actually redeploy. That's not accurate. The Israelis have not withdrawn. There was one village where they kind of withdrew, and then there was a village they withdrew from that they were never in the first place. So it was all just it was theater. The Israelis are still occupying southern Lebanon. The framework agreement that was signed was basically written by the Israelis, and it was signed solely to try to undermine Iran's placement of Lebanon in the first clause of the memorandum of understanding that has now collapsed between the Americans and Iranians, which stated that there must be a ceasefire in Lebanon and that Lebanon's territorial integrity must be protected, meaning that Israel must withdraw. So that is why Marco Rubio actually oversaw that framework agreement between the Israelis, Americans, and the Lebanese that essentially cemented Israel's occupation of southern Lebanon and conditioned Israel's withdrawal or redeployment, as they call it, on Hezbollah first being disarmed, and has put in place this growing idea that the U.S. will be training special units in the Lebanese army to first disarm Hezbollah before Israel withdraws, which would essentially mean civil war in Lebanon. So they're trying to foment a civil war in Lebanon. There's no timeline for Israel's withdrawal. Israel's withdrawal is totally up to the Israelis. When they decide they feel that Lebanon has done a decent job disarming Hezbollah based solely on their own conditions and American-led performance reviews. So yeah, this is the cementing of an occupation of the South, and the Israelis are still blowing up villages, making sure that people have nothing to return to. They're setting up checkpoints like they have in the West Bank. And every single day there's ceasefire violations. And now the MOU between the Iranians and Americans has collapsed. So like that's not really acting to do much at the moment. So Lebanon doesn't really have a say in what happens in Lebanon. Everything is sort of up to how this war between the Iranians and Americans turns out. And once there is a broader settlement, the Iranians will likely make demands about Lebanon. And that will be why the Israelis will withdraw if they do. It'll be because they were forced to by the Americans because the Iranians insisted on it. So that's where we're at right now. Let's hope a civil war doesn't happen before that.
Yeah, and what is the sentiment? I mean, I know that it's not a monolith, but what are people saying and feeling and thinking to the extent that you are witnessing this about what is happening right now? Like, what do the people of Lebanon think? Are there? I know that there are some people who support Hezbollah, some people don't. Is there increasing opposition to Israel just because of literally what it's doing?
A majority of the country is opposed to Israel and sees them as the biggest threat to the country. Polls have shown that a majority of the country is opposed to normalization with Israel. That doesn't mean they're opposed to peace. They want peace. It's about how you get there. Whether people in the country support Hezbollah disarming or not kind of depends geographically on where they're located. If you're not from the South, it's very easy to see it as just a South Lebanon problem and not your problem. And then there's an entire media apparatus in Lebanon that's funded by right-wing oligarchs. There's a guy, including a guy called Anton Sahnawi, who is a Lebanese banker who helped collapse the economy, stole people's money, and is now in a relationship with Morgan Ortagus, Trump's envoy to the Middle East, who, I don't know if you saw, got a lot of backlash for basically sitting at the same table as Benjamin Netanyahu a few days ago at Lindsey Graham's memorial service in Washington at a dinner. He funds a lot of media in the country, and this kind of media promotes the idea that everything's Hezbollah's fault and that the only way out of this is to normalize, and Israel is not actually the enemy, Iran is. So it really matters who you're talking to, where they're located in the country, what their family's political affiliation is, that sort of thing. But some of the things that are dominant across the country is opposition to Israel, recognizing Israel as a threat to the entire country, and not wanting to normalize with it because it's committing a genocide in Gaza and it's destroying South Lebanon. And if people in the South, more than anybody else, are opposed to disarming Hezbollah because that's the only protection they have. The state doesn't protect them. The army doesn't protect them. The army of Lebanon is funded and armed by the Americans with like hand-me-down night vision goggles and broken guns, because the Americans would never give weapons to the Lebanese army that would threaten Israel's military edge that could actually be used to fight the Israelis. In fact, the Lebanese army, Israel's killed like dozens of soldiers during this year. Right. And the Lebanese army is not allowed to fire back at Israel.
That's so crazy.
So
I guess I was wondering, like, I understand that what you were just talking about with the polls. I'm just wondering, and this, I know you have to go, so this will be the final question, but has this changed? Like, are there any people who were Israel supporters and Hezbollah opponents who, because of Israel's actions, are changing their minds?
I mean, I'd have to pull the country. Yeah. I feel like I can't really
get back to us on that after you pull the country.
I can say, I'll go ask people and I'll get back to you. What I can say is that when Israel invades Lebanon, as they did this time around, people's opinions change, because disliking Hezbollah domestically is not the same as opposing Lebanon's right to resist Israel and recognizing that the army doesn't do it, so somebody has to.
Right. Probably helps build popularity for Hezbollah. And I'm not saying that we hear like Democrats being like, and that's why this is so evil because it's doing that. You know, that's not my point, but it is ironic. Well, Rania and Medea, thank you so much for joining. As always, love hearing from you guys. You do amazing work. Any final words from either of you?
Well, I'll put in a plug for Code Pink to go to the website. We have a petition there, a letter going to Marco Rubio to say, dump this report, Cuba report, in the trash, but also dump in the trash the U.S. blockade on Cuba. We have peace camps that people are organizing this summer, coming together to talk about strategies for building up a real peace movement. And we have two things we want people to focus on as well. One is that section in the national the budget for the Pentagon that would merge the U.S. and Israeli militaries together. It's in the Senate called Section 1217, and we want people to call your senators and say, get that out of there. And then finally to say, we can't allow this Pentagon budget to just keep ballooning like it is. Trump wants $1.5 trillion, and we have to be opposing that. So those are some of the things, and we hope people will go to Code Pink to work with us. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. Come back.
And I just want to say thank you to both of you for all of the amazing work you do and all of the solidarity. I think the most important thing to be doing is to make sure we aren't isolated when we're under attack like this as individuals and organizations. So it's so important that we get to, have coverage from you, Katie, and that Code Pink is continuing to do the work it's doing. So I would just encourage everyone who's watching to go do all the things that Medea just mentioned, and to also go to breakthroughnews.org and sign the petition that we have. Donate if you can, so we can fight back against these attacks. And just, make sure you don't let these fascists make you so fearful you get silent, because that's exactly what they want. So again, we got to stick together, not be isolated, so that we can be strong when we push back.
Well, amen. Secular amen to that. Agnostic amen to that. Yeah. Okay. Have a great day, ladies.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
Rania. Much love. Bye.
All right. Now we are going to bring on Jake Romm, but I want to quickly, as a palate cleanser, we don't need a palate cleanser. Actually, there's really nothing that jarring about going from that segment to this one, but because I didn't get to play it, and I don't want to deprive anyone, and we were referring to the kind of the bipartisan nature of McCarthyism. Let's take a look. Let's take a stroll down memory lane and take a look at a video of Nancy Pelosi being asked by Dana Bash on CNN in January of 2024 about anti-genocide activists asking for a ceasefire. And right after that, we will speak to attorney Jake Romm of the Hind Rajab Foundation.
In front of my house all the time. So I have a feeling for what feelings they have. But we have to think about what we're doing. And what we have to do is try to stop the suffering and Gaza. This is women and children, people who don't have a place to go. So let's address that. But for them to call for a ceasefire is Mr. Putin's message. Mr. Putin's message. Make no mistake, this is directly connected to what he would like to see. Same thing with Ukraine. It's about Putin's message. I think some of these protesters are spontaneous and organic and sincere. Some, I think, are connected to Russia. And I say that having looked at this for a long time now. As you know,
think some of these protests are Russian plants?
These are plants. I think some financing should be investigated, and I want to ask the FBI to investigate that.
Wow. So let's see here.
Chats we got to read. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Sorry, I was off screen crying. I was so moved by Nancy's words.
I know it gets me choked up every time.
Yeah. So let's see, another great Friday show. Thank you so much, Brian, for that. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Om Shanti, for that. So 2 great super chats. And Brad, thanks for coming on screen. Now we are going to keep the show going. If you haven't already liked the stream, like the show, please do. If you haven't already subscribed, please do. Also, I'll be taking part in a special stream on Sunday for Abdul el Sayed, 6:30 to 8. We'll post details later on that. But we will be, I think, co-streaming part of that. I'll let you know details, though. Okay, so let us bring on Jake Romm. He is an attorney with the Hind Rajab Foundation, which actually does what so many people should be doing, so many institutions should be doing, but do not do, which is hold Israeli war criminals accountable. So welcome to the show, Jake.
Hey, Katie. Thanks for having me.
Hi. Thank you for joining.
Of course.
And thank you for all the work that you do. I wanted to start off by just asking you about what the Hind Rajab Foundation is and how you chose to name it Hind Rajab Foundation.
Yeah, so the Hind Rajab Foundation is we're a group of activists and lawyers started in very early 2024, so like a few months into the present genocide. And what we do is we, long and short of it is we try to put Israeli soldiers in jail around the world. We try to have them arrested for their crimes, their war crimes, their crimes against humanity, and the crime of genocide. And the way we do that is we compile dossiers of evidence on individual soldiers. We're able to kind of like track where they were in Gaza, and find out what crimes they committed. Like try to sometimes we have the individual soldier and we know they committed X crimes. We've been tracking them. Sometimes we start from the crime and we try to figure out what unit was in the area, and then from there figure out what soldiers were around. But basically, we compile these dossiers of evidence, and then we once we have enough to proceed with a case, once we think we have enough to make a prosecution feasible, we will present it to prosecutors around the world in the relevant jurisdiction. Now, this is either against what we call traveling soldiers. So this is, soldiers who are on vacation after their tour of duty in Gaza. Let's say they go to Brazil. We are able to figure out that they're there. We have a file prepared. We submit it to the Brazilian prosecutor under the principle of universal jurisdiction, right? Which is to say that there are certain crimes that are so heinous that every country in the world has not only the moral obligation, but also the legal obligation and the legal duty and the legal ability to prosecute them, right? Because the idea is that these crimes are so awful that humanity as a whole is injured. And that's really paradigmatically war crimes, crime of genocide, crimes against humanity. The other thing we do is we file against dual nationals, right? As many people may be aware, there are many tens of thousands of dual nationals serving in the Israeli army. I think there's something like almost 20,000 from the United States alone. These are people who go over. They either don't hold Israeli citizenship or they do, but they go over from their home country to go commit genocide in Palestine. And so these people, which I really think is like the core of our work, though maybe not what people know us for, because we're able to move much more slowly and deliberately on these. With universal jurisdiction, jurisdiction expires once the person leaves that whatever country they're in, right? The jurisdiction is tied to their physical presence. With dual nationals, it never expires. It's always there. So we can really take our time with these things and try to make sure that political conditions are ripe.
So you're saying if an Israeli soldier is in Brazil, once the Israeli soldier leaves Brazil, Brazil doesn't have jurisdiction. But if they're dual nationals, then there's no temporal limitations.
Exactly. Yeah. There's no temporal limitations. Yeah. I should say that Brazil, if they launch an investigation while they have jurisdiction, well, then it continues, right? Okay. It's just they have to act while the person is there.
Got it.
And yeah, I mean, that's
dual national means because you don't have to be citizen of two countries. So I thought that's what being a dual national it means. So, but what does it mean?
No, I mean, we say dual nationals, but it does mean a citizen of two countries. But what I mean when I say sometimes a person is not yet a citizen of Israel when they go over there to.
I see. Okay. Right. So they have citizenship other than Israeli.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Yeah. Got it. Yeah.
And then so with respect to the name, I'm sure your listeners know the story of Hind Rajab, but a brief recap for those who might not. Hind Rajab was a little girl in Gaza who. Yeah, that's her. And in 2024, she was, I think 2024 or December 2023, was fleeing northern Gaza south with her family, with her cousin Leon, and I think her cousin's parents. And as they were fleeing, their car came under fire from an Israeli tank and just an Israeli armored unit. And we have the reason she became so famous. Is because we have audio recording of the phone call that she and her cousin made to the Palestinian Red Crescent, begging for help. Right, the adults in the car had been killed by the Israeli fire. Leon was also killed. She was bleeding out, but she's the one who initiated the call. And then Hind took over and is kind of just like begging the Palestinian Red Crescent to come. You can like hear her screaming, and eventually the Palestinian Red Crescent did come, and 2 medical workers were also murdered that day by the Israeli soldiers. And they claimed initially that they weren't in the area. Some of them still claim that. I mean, you see it online. A lot of hasbara people saying actually Hamas did this, which is just preposterous. Eventually, they opened the site became accessible after I think 2 weeks, and they found the car, and it was riddled with over 350 bullets. They were able to find like the charred out remains of the ambulance because it was struck by tank fire, if I remember correctly, and the bodies of the 2 workers.
So they targeted the ambulance precisely because it was on its way to save people.
Yes, and that's just a part of the broader campaign of the murder of medical workers in Gaza. And we named. I didn't have a real name in the organization. I joined after it was already up and running, but the organization was named after Hind because it is really one of the more heart-wrenching and just like egregious stories that has emerged from the genocide, but it's also a typical one, right?
Right.
It is really indicative of what the Israelis are doing every day, which is murdering people in Gaza, killing children, killing aid workers. Just, it is indicative just of what this campaign is, which is the wholesale extermination of life in Gaza is what they are trying to do.
And it just happens to be that this one we have the audio of.
Exactly.
Like so haunting.
Famous, but it's again, this is a commonplace occurrence. In Gaza.
And it's also, I mean, it's really heartbreaking because you hear you hear Hind Rajab's voice, and she sounds like a little girl, because she is a little girl, and she's asking for help. And then you hear the voices of the Red Crescent volunteers, workers, and they have such you can see how, I mean, it's like obviously heartbreaking for them, but they are being so, I don't know how to explain it. Like they're trying so hard to give her hope kind of, and soothe her.
Reassurance.
Yeah. And pray with her. Yeah. And it's just heartbreaking because they wanted to, I mean, and it was delayed because they knew that it was risky. Like they were trying to get permission. So, I mean, it just must be, it's also all the trauma and secondary trauma, like the trauma faced by the people trying to save people who are themselves also targeted, as you pointed out, medical workers, just like journalists. And anything, if you dare to try to save lives, or you dare to try to record the killing, you are, especially at risk.
Yes.
And it's absolutely disgusting. So what kind of successes have you had so far? Have you had any yet, or are you still in the process?
We're still in the, I mean, we have, so we've had successes. None of them, no Israeli soldiers have been put in prison yet. We're operating from a position of the world has abandoned the Palestinian people, and if not outright backs their extermination, right? And so it's really an uphill battle of trying to, make states follow their legal obligations. And I really need to stress that this isn't just that, states have statutes in their criminal code that criminalize these things and give them jurisdiction. It's also that they have the international legal obligation to prosecute these people, right? Under the Geneva Convention, Article 146, it imposes an affirmative duty on states to seek out people who are alleged to have committed grave breaches of the convention and investigate them and bring them to trial without regard to nationality, right? So that means basically you have a duty to exercise universal jurisdiction over war crimes. Right. And so, and there are similar provisions in the Genocide Convention and the Convention Against Torture, right? These states all have the ability. I mean, a lot of them are just incorporated the Rome Statute. The US hasn't incorporated the Rome Statute, but we have our own war crime statute and genocide statute. And they have the obligation. And so they are failing their legal obligations under treaties that they have signed. There's another legal obligation, which stems from a 2007 ICJ case, where once the risk of genocide, not even just like a genocide, but once the risk of genocide becomes apparent, becomes known, or you ought to know it, states have an obligation to do everything within their power to bring it to an end, right? And that's universal. Every state has an obligation to do this under the Genocide Convention. And, it's no excuse, the court says, that, one individual action won't actually bring it to an end, because perhaps if everyone acted in concert, they could affect the outcome and save lives. And, measures that are within their power are things like cutting off diplomatic ties, cutting off economic ties, sanctions, right? But one that's like really manifestly within their power, and it's frankly quite easy to do, it's a discrete demand, is if a war criminal comes to your state, investigate them and prosecute them. That's easy, right? And so you already have the obligation stemming from other things, but now because there's a genocide going on, you have an extra obligation on top of that. And so, as I said, we're facing very hostile terrain, but that's not to say we haven't had some successes, right? So we've had like investigations launched in Peru and Brazil, and they're ongoing, and a couple other jurisdictions. We had Israeli soldiers arrested at a music festival in Belgium last year. They were ultimately, they were interrogated and ultimately released, and they referred the case to the ICC, which is not what they should do. They should prosecute under their own domestic courts. We can get into why later. But we had that, and just recently, just in the past few days, an Israeli soldier who's committed war crimes in Gaza was on his way to the Netherlands to judge some kind of collegiate debate competition. And as a result of our filing, the competition was canceled because they're like, you are not allowed to come. We are not going to go through with this. So, none of these are what the law demands, because the law demands that these people get prosecuted and punished, right? But we are trying to chip away at this wall of impunity that has existed for Israel since 1948, right? They have never been held accountable for the crimes they've committed against the Palestinian people, and they have been committing crimes against the Palestinian people since the colonization of Palestine began, right? Even prior to 48, but since obviously clearly since 1948, since the Nakba, right? And this wall of impunity is so ingrained, especially in the Western world. But I also don't want to let the global South off the hook because it's ingrained there as well. But it's so ingrained, and it's such it's starting from such a profound disadvantage, and yet it's an iterative process. By which I mean, the more we just do these filings, the more we do, the better the outcomes start becoming. And part of that is a result of these statutes are kind of dormant in so many states. States don't really prosecute war crimes or use universal jurisdiction very often, although the Europeans did it quite robustly against ISIS and also crimes committed by people in the Assad government. So they know what they have, right? But a lot of governments don't. And so part of it is like getting these legal tools, back in the view of prosecutors. Part of it is letting people in these countries know that this is a discrete demand that they can make of their government. A lot of people that I speak to don't know that this is a tool that's available. And through the filings, people become aware of that and do start to exert political pressure. And something we always say is that the law is very clear. It could not be clearer, frankly. But the only thing missing is political will, and that does come from like grassroots movements and people on the ground in these countries trying to pressure their governments to do something, to do anything, right, to stem the tide of this genocide. And as more filings come out, not only did they become aware of it, but also it puts very helpfully, I think, faces to these crimes. These crimes are massive. They're overwhelming. And a lot of the demands that are placed on governments, which are good ones and are correct ones to make, are structural in nature, right? It's, disentangle your economies, divest, disentangle your military production and arms sales, right? And these things are important and they must be done and indeed are legally required. But I think for reasons that should be obvious, are like somewhat difficult for people to cognize or people to get emotionally invested in. Whereas the language of criminality is quite clear. Like, this is a guy, this is his crime, go get him. Everyone understands that. And we don't mean to like individualize the genocide,
right?
Because exactly our proposition this is why we go after rank and file soldiers, is that this is not a few bad apples. This is not a product of just the higher ups, right? Because even though Netanyahu and Gallant and generals may have authored the policies, those policies are carried out by soldiers on the ground. Those are the people who are on the ground committing the crimes that have been authorized by their higher ups. And so it's not that like, oh, this guy's a bad apple, that guy's a bad apple. It's really that the entire military apparatus is involved in a campaign of criminality. There is no way for them to execute this campaign legally within the bounds of the law because the aim is genocide, right? And so in like a pointillist fashion, right, I think a composite picture of the overwhelming and total criminality emerges through these individual files.
Right. It all, yeah, excuse me. It is interesting because I think people who think like you and me, obviously we, think like structurally, like you were saying, and we often see like the lower, it's like lower hanging. I don't want to say that because that makes it dismissive, but we often see like for Abu Ghraib, for instance, like the people punished for Abu Ghraib were very like low down on the chain, right? But it does seem also like you want to kind of create like denormalize this criminality, like appropriately stigmatize it, right?
Yes, exactly.
And create a sense of like chip away at the sense of impunity. But it also seems like a workaround given the kind of sadly the I don't know, the neutered nature of international humanitarian law.
Yeah, 100%. And part of that is just the way it's set up, right? Like the ICC is designed to go after like quote those most responsible. And because of capacity issues and because of the mandate, that does mean going after people like Gallant and Netanyahu, right? And there's obviously more that they should be going after, but they're also like severely limited by like they have severely limited resources, and they're constantly under attack by the United States. And so there's a sense in which like international justice is equipped to handle the higher ups, but it is really not equipped to handle individual soldiers. The only thing that really would be is if a special tribunal was set up, something like the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, or the one I set up for Rwanda. And like these are set up for specific, they're not general courts, they're for specific scenarios, right? And so they have a wider mandate and they can generally take in more perpetrators. But key thing is they're set up by the Security Council. And we know who's on the United States is on the Security Council. So this is not going to happen. And so it really falls to domestic courts. And I think it should fall to domestic courts anyway, right? And for a few reasons. One is that that is how international law gets teeth. It's up to countries to enforce international law. I mean, we see this with the ICC arrest warrant, right? An arrest warrant has been issued. The ICC has no army. It has no police. And so it's up to individual countries to effectuate those arrest warrants and arrest Netanyahu, which they are abrogating their duties to do. Every time he flies over a country to get to the United States, those countries are in violation of the Rome Statute. Right. So there's that it's up to individual countries to effectuate international law and give it teeth. But also, we don't want these countries to be able to, say, well, he belongs in The Hague. It's true. These people belong in The Hague.
Right.
They belong in your courts too. And this is a way of kind of creating a global effort, a truly global effort, and a global consensus that these war criminals, basically everyone who's in the ITF, they're not welcome. And this is a way of making them feel not welcome and making the world much smaller for them. The world needs to become small for them. And the way countries do that is by following through on their very basic legal obligations to prosecute.
Right. Yeah. And is the hope that they will also be like scared and it'll encourage more defection or more? I mean, is there any? Does that play any part in it? That'll cause like I don't know, some kind of mutiny or?
I mean, I don't know about a mutiny because the vast majority of Israeli society is like in favor of the genocide, and actually it has been over time radicalizing and moving further to the right, which is now a trend in much of the world, but it wasn't always. So no, not really, but it is like part of why they feel they can commit these crimes is because they can commit these crimes. Because they've gotten away with committing these crimes for so long, and they have no fear of consequence. I mean, and this is very obvious to us because so much of the evidence that we gather comes from their own published videos. People on social media publishing their own crimes. Right. Because they aren't even thinking of them as crimes, or to the extent that they are, you have ministers and soldiers kind of just being like, fuck The Hague, like come and get me. There's this real culture of impunity that has been fostered by the world. That's refusal to prosecute them. And so we do want them to be afraid. We want them to feel that consequences are coming. Right. And will this curb their behavior? Maybe. But it will, I think, kind of force some contradictions to the fore in the world system and in international law itself that can help bring about a time when countries feel more comfortable sanctioning them, right? You kind of like make the road by walking, and once that wall of impunity falls, the floodgates are open, right? I really think that once the first soldier, the first official is prosecuted and put in prison, that will really be the beginning of the end.
Right.
And it's not right. And I don't want to suggest that like the law is the tool that's going to liberate Palestine. It's not. It is one of the tools in the toolbox, and we are using that tool, but it's not the end all and be all, right? There's all this other work that needs to happen, but this is the one we know how to do. It's the one we're good at. And so we are playing our part, but it's, I think, a very important part.
Yeah. And just to clarify, I didn't mean would this encourage mutiny because it would cause like a moral transformation. I mean, literally out of self-interest, people will be like, I don't want to not be able to travel and go to like Thailand and Latin America. And what, you know, they always do this, right? Well, although I guess those trips are like before the army or after the army that they go on?
After the army. So
okay. So yeah.
The crimes, right?
Yeah, right.
But it is, I mean, there's actually a very interesting case recently in Australia where these Israeli teenagers basically were granted refugee status or granted asylum because they said, we have like made an oath not to serve in the IDF. And if we are compelled to go back to Israel, we will be forced to commit war crimes.
Oh, wow.
And we will either be imprisoned or we will be forced to commit war crimes. Right. And the Australian government was like, yeah, no argument with that. So you guys,
and they're not like great on this issue. The Australian
they're pretty bad on it generally.
Yeah.
But it's just indisputable, right? And that's also part of what the work does is like building consensus that these people, that there are war crimes being committed, even if they're not actually putting them in prison like they're obligated to do. It has other downstream effects like this. And it's great. I mean, it's a handful of people who are refusing to serve in the IDF. But the handful that do has been growing, and that's a good thing. I mean, it's not, it really is small. I really don't want to discount the kind of genocidal fervor that has overtaken Israeli society in toto, but like there are people there who are refusing to serve, and it's encouraging that they are couching it in these terms that we will be forced to commit war crimes. That's an important thing for them to be saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, so talk to us about how this relates to, you know, Zohran obviously said he would arrest Netanyahu. Mm-hmm. Then he was very, you know, straightforward about the limitations of that, right? So he basically said his administration looked into it and they would not be able to. But then you have people like, you know, John Fetterman making it seem like he was obviously like not able to, like it was as if it was this like black and white thing that Zohran was being ridiculous or lying, or there's no actual, I mean, obviously like Fetterman says ridiculous things and the only time you ever see him like put on a suit is when his boss Netanyahu comes to town. But talk about those limitations. And I think these limitations kind of speak to why your approach at Hind Rajab is so needed.
Yeah, I mean, Zohran can't arrest Netanyahu. He's right about that, right? He was never able to. I appreciate that he explored all his legal options, right? It's not very few legal issues are cut and dry, right?
That's what I'm saying. It's not like I'm not saying that Zohran could and Fetterman's wrong, but the way he presented it, I mean, obviously the guy doesn't have a grasp on, this stuff. Yeah,
Fetterman is a moron and a racist and a genocidal Nazi. So like we can just kind of discount him, right? But like. But yeah, Zohran cannot arrest Netanyahu. It was always kind of clear that he wouldn't be able to, but it's important to explore it and say that you are interested in doing it. And so I really appreciate that he did, and that opens up a discursive space. And he is calling, you know, he's probably the first major politician in the United States, as far as I can remember, to call for the United States federal government to arrest Netanyahu. And they do have that authority. They can do that. Even though they're not a party to the Rome Statute, it doesn't matter. You can arrest him under domestic laws. You can arrest him and just send him to The Hague. You don't need to be a party to effectuate the warrants. So no, I mean, there are limitations, and they really stem not from like no one can arrest Netanyahu in the United States. It's just as the mayor, he can't do it. And he can't do it because the US isn't a party to the Rome Statute. So it's not like the warrants have any like actual legal effect here the way they do in countries that are a party to the Rome Statute. It's also that Netanyahu has committed crimes under US law, right? Under the US War Crimes Act and the genocide statute. But those crimes are federal crimes. And as the mayor, he's like not empowered to necessarily effectuate, arrest people for all federal crimes. There have to be like some specific grants or some like technical stuff. But right, like the United States government could turn around tomorrow and say, we are arresting Netanyahu for crimes under US law. right? They won't do that, obviously, because they're not only just like complicit in the genocide, but co-perpetrating it. But they could, and there's issues of immunity, right? But head of state immunity is not absolute, and the U.S. practice on head of state immunity is basically you either get it or you don't, depending on whether we like you, right?
Right.
And most countries now have a consensus that head of state immunity goes away with respect to international crimes like genocide and war crimes. So the U.S. could just brush that aside. There is a kind of like temporary immunity that he enjoys because of the Treaty on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations, which is that if you are coming to New York to go to the United Nations, you cannot be arrested for the duration of that visit, as long as you are like in the like official visit, right? So if Netanyahu goes to the UN, but then goes off mission to go do something else that's not the UN, he could be arrested, right? But like this is a good treaty. It's important to have that treaty, right? And the U.S. kind of violates it anyway. But it's important to have that treaty. But it's also, that's just a very like specific way you get immunity for that very time-bound period. But it's also, I think, important to stress that like this is why it's important to suspend Israel from the United Nations, right? It's something that Malaysia has brought up. It's something that's been talked about before, and there hasn't been any movement on it, which I think is quite cowardly. And there should be movement on it. The UN General Assembly has the capacity to do this, and they did it to South Africa. And they should do it to Israel. And if they were to do it to Israel, then there could be no official UN delegations from Israel, and they would never enjoy that kind of immunity. And of course, this wouldn't make the US arrest them, right. But it is like these people are enjoying immunity from genocide charges, right, because of their official UN status in this one like specific way. And it would really send a signal that like they are a pariah state. Like these are exactly the things that you're not supposed to do. There's this principle in international law called Jus Cogens norms, right? And these are the norms that are like basically it means like the most important norms. These are things that are non-derogable. So you can't like torture is one, genocide is another, right? You cannot have in your legal code any exception to the prohibition on torture, which Israel does, by the way. And so like these are like Israel's routinely violating the most important norms in international law. It is also routinely violating the sovereignty of every country around it by invading them. They're committing, like on top of everything else, the crime of aggression, right? And that is how rogue states act. And it is exactly the mandate of the United Nations to prevent that from happening. And when it does happen, to do anything it possibly can to maintain international peace and security. And the greatest threat to international peace and security, aside from the United States, is Israel at this moment. And whether there's any separation is also still a matter of debate.
Right.
Yeah.
And can you explain what the Rome Statute is for people who don't know?
Yeah. So the Rome Statute is the statute that creates the International Criminal Court and lays out the crimes and the procedures, right? So it's a treaty, right? If you accede to the Rome Statute, then you are a member of the International Criminal Court. And that is one of the ways the court can get jurisdiction. I want to be clear because it's something that the Israelis and the Americans say a lot. That's not the only way the court can get jurisdiction. The Israelis and the Americans always say, well, we're not members, so there's no jurisdiction over us. Well, no, because the court can also get jurisdiction if over any crime that is committed on a state territory. Palestine is, a state party's territory. Palestine is a state party. So whoever commits a crime on Palestinian territory, that the Rome Statute the International Criminal Court has jurisdiction, right? And this is the same thing. This is how they have jurisdiction over Russia, right? Russia is not a state party. Ukraine is. So
right
there you go. So yeah, but that is what the Rome Statute is.
Right. Thank you. Now, I wanted to actually show, Brad had put this on the screen. We have state parties to Rome Statute and their statuses. So let's take a look at this. Okay, state parties to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. So what do we have? You have state party signatory that's not ratified, state party that subsequently withdrew its membership, signatory that subsequently withdrew its signature, non-state party, non-signatory. So what stands out here in terms of, obviously you see the U.S. was a signatory that subsequently withdrew its signature?
Yeah, so the Rome Statute, when it first, I think it was Clinton signed the Rome Statute, but they never ratified it, which means that they were never actually a member. And so it was like kind of like keeping it on the table. Even signing it incurs some kind of legal obligations to it. You can't undermine the object and purpose of the treaty. But the U.S. was never actually a party. And indeed, like under Bush, that's when I think they withdrew the signature. They also passed the, I forget the actual name of it, something like Protecting U.S. Service Members Act.
The Hague Invasion Act or something?
Yeah, Hague Invasion Act, which is that if any U.S. service member or ally, I think, gets brought before the International Criminal Court, they're authorized to use force against the Netherlands to stop a trial, right? And this was, of course, passed in the context of the U.S.'s so-called global war on terror, which was a globe-spanning campaign of criminality that saw, the U.S. torture program, a number of other war crimes. And so it makes sense that the U.S. would be afraid of ICC jurisdiction. And indeed, the U.S. should be brought before the ICC for the crimes it's committing in the Caribbean right now, right? The crimes it's committing against Cuba, the crimes it's committing in Palestine,
right?
All manner of things, right? So it makes sense that these places would be afraid of it.
And Jake, sorry to interject. I just wanted to ask you and to show everyone, I pulled up the State Department is, as I'm sure you're already aware, they're launching their campaign to dismantle International Criminal Court's threat to American sovereignty. And just as you laid out there, it really does seem to stem from the main issue they have is that America can be subject to the International Court and U.S. Politicians and whatnot, and that's what seems to be the real sticking point there.
I would actually dispute that because
really?
I think that's the real sticking point. The real sticking point is Israel, is that they are defending Netanyahu because the U.S. is not currently under investigation, right? There was one for crimes committed in Afghanistan, but it's dormant now and kind of gone away. But Israel is obviously, there's warrants out for Netanyahu's arrest. And so I really think that this is not the United States being afraid that they are going to come before the dock at any time. It's really this is about defense of. Well,
do you think that, and I totally agree with what you said now that you corrected me, and thank you for that. I would agree with what you just said, but would you say that when it was George W. Bush pulled out in the early 2000s, do you think at that point it was out of concern that
100%. Yeah. Okay. That was 100% out of concern because the U.S. was mostly, I think, for the torture, right? The U.S. was everyone knows about Guantanamo Bay, but it also was spanning the globe. The U.S. had black sites in a number of other countries, and were concerned about being brought before the dock for torture and the other war crimes they were committing.
And to bolster what you just said about the current scenario, this is from the Times of Israel from 2 or 3 days ago. Chad announces intent to withdraw from ICC, drawing praise from the U.S. And so, please correct me, but it seems like now part of this push from the State Department to dismantle the ICC is to pressure other states to withdraw from the ICC, and that's starting to happen. This was saying there are some is the 4th African country.
Venezuela also withdrew recently.
Wonder why.
And I should say that the U.S. is doing this to protect Israel. That's how much is very clear. But there is a broader campaign to basically dismantle the international legal order as we have known it since 1945.
Right.
The United States right now, and this is why I think that it can be properly called fascist, right, is trying to remake the world in a kind of 19th century might makes right, rule of conquest, rule of power mode. And, the international legal order, obviously not perfect, obviously has resulted in or enabled, mass death around the world since it was inaugurated. 1945, end of World War II, United Nations Genocide Convention comes in 1949, Geneva Convention's 49. And then, Vietnam, Korea, all of these horrible wars and, campaigns of mass murder by the West since then. Right. So I'm not saying that the order was perfect, but I am saying what's coming next is worse. Right. What the United States is trying to usher in, I think, looks like Israel around the world. It looks like states committing mass murder with complete impunity and without even the the discursive tools to speak the same language of the law. I mean, that is what international law largely is. It's a discourse that creates norms, that creates global norms, and they're not always followed, and there's no central enforcement mechanism. But these norms have gained power. They do gain power over time, and the United States, along with Israel, are really trying to just completely dismantle them, so that it is whoever has the most bombs gets to do whatever they want.
Right. Well, Jake, we mentioned John Fetterman and how no one really takes him seriously, obviously. But, the whole issue of genocide, you still see people claiming, oh, this is not a genocide. And not just saying it's not genocide. I mean, this is ridiculous argument that it's anti-Semitic or blood libel to call it genocide, which is, I mean, these people obviously have no concern with anyone ever taking that term seriously again, because how can anyone take that seriously? Like, even if you disagree on whether it's genocide, that does not make people who call it that anti-Semitic. But you do have people who are lawyers who hide behind language of, expertise. And I want to show one of these arguments. And this was in response to a tweet from Mehdi Hassan. So Brad, let's show that. Okay, so Mehdi had tweeted out, the term genocide for Gaza is not actually highly contested except by pro-Israel partisans. It is the near consensus view of genocide scholars, human rights groups, including Israeli human rights groups, human rights groups like B'Tselem, and UN investigators, rapporteurs, and commissions. Okay, and now here, let's take a look at the response to this. And this comes from someone named, hold on, let me just zoom in on this. Someone named Elliot Mallon, who is himself a lawyer. Okay. This, of course, isn't true for Mehdi Hassan. If you were to actually read these reports and understand what the law says about genocide, you'd understand that each of them failed to apply the jurisprudence. Amnesty's report said that the jurisprudence of the ICJ would likely preclude a finding of genocide in Gaza. B'Tselem's report states expressly that they use a, quote, broader analytical framework, end quote. The UNCOI fails to apply the only reasonable inference test, not testing other possible explanations to the conduct of Hamas. Not a single one has tested the substantiality requirement to determine that in part, quote unquote, in part, destruction was the intended outcome. These reports and accusations are shams. They're lying to you about what genocide is and what's happened in Gaza. What this is circular logic, and it's ultimately illogical. But most damning of all for Mehdi Hassan is the fact that the now fired prosecutor of the ICC implied to him that the evidence doesn't support a charge for genocide, especially after his request for a warrant for the lower threshold crime against humanity of extermination was already rejected. In a few years' time, there will be a decision at the ICJ, and the only way to find that Israel committed genocide will be for the ICJ to change what genocide is and how it works. If they stick to the intent of the drafters and even Raphael Lemkin, they will not find that Israel has committed genocide. So a lot to respond to there, but do you want me to keep it up, or do you want to just from?
No, I know the arguments. Right. This is the thing you hear all the time. And this guy is either like illiterate or a liar, and with like hasbara people, sometimes it's both, right?
Right.
But what he's referring to is you see this a lot with hasbara lawyers. They like to bring up this this thing that comes from the ICJ case about the genocide in Bosnia against the Bosnians, right? And there's this thing they say that like it must be the only reasonable inference you can get from the totality of the circumstances, because often with the genocide there's not like a written down like master plan of like we are going to commit genocide. So you have to gather the evidence circumstantially from like what people are saying, what people are doing, and it must be the only reasonable inference. Now, that is what it says, but the only reasonable inference just means that it refers to like that there is genocidal intent. It doesn't mean the exclusive reasonable inference, right? And so their argument is that, well, if the Israelis are doing all of these actions against, against Palestinians in Gaza, maybe their intent is just military in nature and they're just trying to kill Hamas and everything is collateral, whatever, right? Well, that doesn't matter. They can also have the intent to complete a military objective alongside genocidal intent. And if they couldn't have that, then basically no genocides have ever been committed, right? And like this is it's so like obviously specious. If you just go to like the text of Article 1 of like the first article of the Genocide Convention, Yeah, I'll just read it. I have it pulled up. The contracting parties confirm that genocide, whether committed in time of peace or in time of war, is a crime under international law, which they undertake to prevent and to punish. So that text is like, yeah, genocide can be committed in time of war. If the exclusive intent, the exclusive inference must be that you have genocidal intent, then you can't commit it really in time of war, because you always have also military objectives. Like I think of the Armenian genocide, right? The Turks couch this as saying, or the Ottomans, I should say, couch this as saying, the Armenians represented a military threat. They were a fifth column being used by Russia against the empire, against the war effort. Well, they still committed genocide, even if they also had military objectives for killing Armenians. Similarly, the Israelis are, do have a military objective. They also have a genocidal objective, and they coexist quite neatly.
It's the one time Israel practices coexistence.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it's just like obviously wrong. And it's also like not an articulation of, it's really also not, and he like misquotes the Amnesty report. The Amnesty report is like, they're not saying the ICJ would need to change their jurisprudence. They're doing what any good lawyer would do and raising one of the objections that they're anticipating and putting it down. And so what they're saying is there's a really restrictive reading you could do of that line in the ICJ case, and they know the Israelis are going to do it. So they raise it to say, there's this restrictive reading. Here's why it's wrong.
Right.
So like, that's what they're doing. And also like states agree that it's wrong. Like, there's this good article I'd recommend everyone read in Opinio Juris, which is this very prominent, well-respected legal blog, basically outlining that like what the ICJ meant by that statement, and also referring to how a number of state parties to the Genocide Convention agree with the very obvious plain reading of it, that like this has to be the only reasonable inference you can make, but not the exclusive inference, right? Which is to say, you need to look at the totality of the evidence and say the only reasonable thing I can conclude is that they are trying to commit genocide. And they can be trying to do that alongside any other goal. And indeed, the Serbia decision that they reference talks about how you can have multiple layers of intent and multiple motives for doing something. You have personal motives, financial motives. Let's think of a case that I like to talk about because it's an important case for corporate complicity, is this case against Bruno Tesch. And it happened in the post-World War II tribunals. It wasn't Nuremberg, if I remember correctly, but it was an American-British tribunal. And Bruno Tesch was this guy who he ran a company that produced Zyklon B.
He was a Tesch bro. Sorry, I can't help you.
So he produced Zyklon B, which people don't know was the pesticide that they used in the gas chambers. And his argument before the court was, I didn't have any intent to commit murder. I just wanted to make a buck. I just wanted to make money. And so what the SS did with the Zyklon B is none of my business. And the court returned the verdict saying, had they not been using this to commit mass murder, you would not have made a profit. And so that may have been your primary intent, was to make money. You also had the secondary intent to commit mass murder, because that is how you made your money. And so he hung, right? And like under the Israeli, interpretation of international law, Bruno Tesch walks away scot-free. The man who made the pesticide for the mass murder and the Holocaust, right? Like he goes away, he's fine. Right. And so it's just like obviously nonsense. Now to get to the other points that he raises, he talks about like the substantiality requirement. And what that means is that, so the genocide statute talks about it's a number of acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a group, like ethnic group, religious group, whatever. Right. And so the in part needs to be substantial, right? It's not just like, oh, I killed one guy for a discriminatory motive. That doesn't rise to it. And what they're saying is that not that they're taking like the number of known deaths, which is 73,000 right now. Of course, it's obviously much higher than that. We know that it's obviously much higher than that. But they're taking that and saying that's actually not really a substantial portion of the Palestinian population of Gaza. Now, of course, I think all of us would disagree with that just on its face already, but let's take it at its word and say that's actually not substantial. Again, of course it is.
Of course, yeah.
What they're
For
saying,
argument's sake.
What they're ignoring is the actual text of the genocide statute, which is to say killing people is how we like understand colloquially what genocide is. But there's 5 enumerated acts that constitute the crime of genocide. The first one is killing. None of the other ones are killing.
Right.
And so when you're targeting a substantial portion of the group, It's not just how many people have died. It's also how many people have, I'll just read them off. Have you caused serious bodily or mentally harm to, right? How many people have you deliberately inflicted conditions of life calculated to bring about their physical destruction, whole or in part? How many people are subject to that? How many people have been subject to like the imposition of measures intended to prevent births? So, I mean, let's just take C, right? Deliberately inflicting on group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, whole or in part. Almost every single dwelling in Gaza has been destroyed. Almost every single hospital in Gaza was destroyed. People were subject to starvation. People were forced to drink dirty water. People are living in tents in these just like absolute like abject conditions of deprivation. All of these people, which is to say, basically all 2.2 million residents of Gaza who were there prior to the war, the number obviously now is much lower because of the murders, have been subjected to those conditions. And so when you talk about substantiality and like in part, well, every single person in Gaza has been subjected to this. Every single person in Gaza has been subjected to serious bodily or mental harm, right? And this is not even including the genocide that is ongoing, I would say, in the West Bank as well, and just basically across all of occupied Palestine against all Palestinians. So this is also just like, again, like either a case of deliberate lying or a case of just like straight up illiteracy.
Exactly.
To the point where like, it's really so cynical, and it really depends on hiding behind this, this label of like, I'm a lawyer, I know what I'm talking about.
A facade of
and thinking that people aren't going to look into it. And it also, I think, and this might be ironic coming from someone who works at a legal organization as a lawyer, but like, this is kind of a problem with like the language of the law in general, is that once you start talking about, well, this is illegal, that strike was illegal, that one's illegal, you go down this rabbit hole of legality, right? That's a term I think from Alonso Garmendi, is a good legal commentator. You go down this rabbit hole of legality where you're now, instead of talking about what's happening to the Palestinian people, you are talking about discrete instances and debating the finer points and the details. And like for lawyers, I mean, we have to do that. That's important, right? But it's easy. These hasbara guys like Elliot Malin, they want you to go down that path because then you're kind of like playing a logic game, and you're not thinking of like, hey, these are a colonized people who are being exterminated by their colonizer. And they want you to lose sight of that. They really want you to lose sight of the total situation in Palestine, which even before October 7th, right, was a murderous one. But like, even if Israel wasn't routinely committing mass murder against the Palestinians, wasn't routinely bombing Gaza and starving them, right? This situation would still be unjust because colonialism is unjust. It needs to be done away with entirely, regardless of these crimes. And so they want you to focus on the finer points of legality so that you miss the forest for the trees.
Right. And they also pretend to be objective, and they pretend to be based in the law, and listen to me, I'm an expert. And I mean, the other thing is that like the same people who say it's not a genocide, it would be one thing if they were like, there are war crimes, but there's no genocide. These people never bring up the war crimes, right? Yeah. They always misrepresent the law. They're like, oh, well, there was a Hamas person in this hospital, so obviously it's okay to strike. It's like, no, that's actually just a blatant violation of international humanitarian law.
Right?
Yeah, you're not allowed to do that. Yeah, they're like, so these people, I really hate the, like, I've said this on a recent episode, but I hate the combination of condescension and either stupidity or dishonesty, like what you said, illiteracy or disingenuousness. And the other thing is, Brad, can you throw that definition back up on the screen, please? Where, with the 5 parts, the 5 elements of it. Because, I mean, I can just say it, but something that's significant is that it doesn't require, it says in the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed. That's right. So it's not like you have to prove A through E for it to be genocide. And, it's just so annoying and frustrating because obviously this is supposed to be actionable, right? That was it's like the convention to prevent genocide, right? It's not just, so obviously people the intent is to use it to stop it. And the other thing that people like to say as an excuse is like, oh no, the ICJ found that genocide was plausible. They didn't find genocide, but isn't that because it would take so much longer to determine that genocide is there than genocide is plausible? that the
Yeah,
only
exactly.
possible way to reacting in a timely manner.
Well, what they said was they said it in like this roundabout way that like the Palestinians have like their claim that their right to not be subjected to genocide is a plausible one, so the case can proceed. And they would only say that because a plausible genocide is being committed, and the Israelis like to twist it around, right? But like, but yeah, and like it is the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And so the argument that, well, you need to wait until it's complete to do something about it, or to make a judgment on it, is like utterly preposterous. It's not what the convention is for. And going back to that ICJ case, it was also had to do with Bosnia. It was the Srebrenica case that I was talking about. What they said was once genocide becomes like a remote possibility, once the possibility of genocide is known or ought to be known, that's when all of the obligations kick in. Because the whole point is to prevent it from happening.
Right.
The whole point is that we don't want this crime to be committed. And the Israeli argument of like, well, we don't know if it's been committed yet because we haven't finished doing it, is just like, it's like obviously preposterous.
Yeah, it's like with the Salem witch trials, right? Where they would like drown a woman, they'd throw a woman into the water, and if she drowned, she was not a witch.
Right.
Right. And if she didn't drown, she was a witch. So it's just basically like, how can we kill this woman / how can we kill Palestinians? Right.
Yes, exactly.
So what can you just mention? This is kind of nerdy, but you mentioned earlier that there's a point that Amnesty brought up that Israel would raise, and then they raised it, and then they debunked it. What do you know what that is offhand?
Yeah, it's basically they were saying that like, so that only reasonable inference test that comes from the Bosnia decision of the ICJ, like it's on page, I was just looking at it, I think it's like on page like, I want to say like 111 of the,
no, 112. Just kidding. I have no idea.
In any event, it's whatever. It's towards the end of the amnesty report. I'm not going to get the exact page. So at the end of the amnesty report, and they're saying that like, okay, like the only reasonable inference test, they bring it up to be like, there is a reading of that line that the Israelis are advancing that is extremely restrictive and would basically preclude a finding of genocide ever. So they're like, that is one possible reading. We are raising that so that we can say that is not the correct reading.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And these guys are taking that quote to say, oh, they're saying that's the reason or the reasoning, and we have to like,
Right. Yeah, got it. So just, again, totally dishonest.
I just had a quick question, Jake, if you could clarify this or let me know if I'm understanding this correctly, because you're helping me better understand. I knew that the U.S. had withdrawn from the ICC and removed its, acknowledgement or of the Rome Statute. But then you mentioned that we have our own genocide laws. Correct. And looking into that, the information that I could find is saying that essentially what it then requires for the U.S., like if we wanted to arrest Netanyahu when he comes to the U.S. or something like that, it's all at the end of the day here. This is what I was reading from. The prevention part of this, it says that the U.S. holds a legal and diplomatic obligation to help prevent and punish acts of genocide globally, though formal political determinations on when atrocities legally constitute genocide remain subject to executive and congressional foreign policy evaluation. So basically, it would require Congress or the president to formally acknowledge that genocide is happening. Is that
no,
correct?
it wouldn't. So
if you watch this live, you're in luck. You got to see that whole thing. And if you're watching this later and you want to see the full thing, you can find it at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. That's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. But again, we are providing you with so much free content. We never would deprive you of hours. So we're giving you hours of free content as always. But we do ask you to become Patreon supporters, either at the $1 a month level, which is literally $12 a year, which I think most people hopefully can afford, or a lot of people can afford. And if you can do it at the $5 a month level, that's especially appreciated. And that is less than 25 cents a day, Monday through Friday. And that gets you access to all sorts of exclusive content, early release, bonus content, extended interviews. I'm going to just quickly read our recent Patreons. Okay, so Patreon meet. So since our last stream, thank you so much. What date was our last stream, Brad? What day was Tuesday?
That would have been the 27th.
Okay. And then before that was a Friday stream. That would have been what date?
That would have been the 24th.
Okay, great. So I'm going to read our recent.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Katie. The Tuesday would have been the 28th. Friday would have been the 24th.
Okay, great. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, James, for becoming a member. Thank you so much, Stephen, for becoming a member. Thank you so much, Black Birthday, for becoming a member. Thank you so much, Levon. Thank you so much, Brandon. Thank you so much, Sean. And thank you so much, Carl. Again, please do subscribe. That way you don't miss any of these these streams. Please do become Patreon supporters or YouTube members. Please do like the stream. That's a free way to help. I will be posting information about, oh yes, we will be interviewing Rokana this Thursday. I believe at 6:30, we'll put a post about that. Also, I'll be posting information about this thing that we're doing on Sunday for Abdul el Sayed. We have 2 new super chats. Taharani Parker, thank you so much. And Brian, thank you so much. Looking forward to the Rokana interview. That was really wonderful. Anything else that we need to say, Brad? No. Okay, great. We will see you, I guess, Sunday and then next week. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Nate. And thank you all for tuning in. Bye, everyone.
I did everything right and they indicted me.
And I don't know what the I'm doing.
Antifa!